If I could, I'd like to remind everyone that this meeting is webcast and that it is also then archived for later viewing. So our entire procedure will be archived in that manner. We'll begin by introducing ourselves. And so why don't we start down at the end with Rex and we'll come around to the left.
Rex Peebles, Assistant Commissioner for Academic Quality and Workforce here at the Coordinating Board.
Dan Mims, Vice Chair of the Board, San Jacinto College, Houston, Texas.
Armin Cantini, Regent, Galveston College.
Pam Bain, President of Hill College.
Cheryl Sparks, I serve in the role of President of Howard College. Hi, everyone.
K. Paul Holt, Chair, McLennan College in Waco.
Anita Shackelford from the Southwest Texas Junior College in Uvalde. I'm a board member.
Good morning. I'm Lonnie Howard, President of Lamar Institute of Technology.
Those are the members we have up on the panel right now. We are expecting others to come in later, and we'll call them out when they arrive. Today is the Appropriations Committee on the House side, so we have a few of our guests and presenters that are over in the Capitol doing that work right now, including the Commissioner and I suspect Dr. Gardner too. Should they arrive before we complete our proceedings, we'll ask them for any sort of comments. Unless, Gary, would you like to say anything, or you, Rex, on their behalf?
No, but I'm sure they would welcome you and appreciate your being here, and always appreciate the input that we receive from you guys. So thanks again for being here this morning.
So I believe we have a quorum. I'll also say that the agenda that was provided to all of us electronically a while ago is one that, because of some of the absences, may have gaps in it. The other is it will also be reordered to allow for those who are absent to present, or to present and leave to meet other obligations. All of that is because the legislature's in full swing, and so for that we are both thankful and dreadful. and so, oh, dang, was this being webcast?
They probably feel the same way.
Yes. So if we could, without any objections, we'll go and move into our agenda. The order we'll do is we'll begin with item 1 and 2, and then we'll do some other items. Although I now see Dr. Gardner coming. So, so let's pause instead and allow him an opportunity to visit with us, as is his practice.
Apologize for being late. I thought the meeting was at 10, and then I was waiting around, and now I'm late. I apologize. Well, thank all of you for coming. It's always a busy time for you, and it's even busier now with the legislature in session, I can say, and you'll hear more from ER later, that they have really gotten active in the last week and a half. I think I've heard some very positive things, I think, in terms of legislators mentioning, if you're going to suggest something like success points, you ought to fund them. It came up in the House, what was it, about a week and a half ago, Rose? Donna Howard, I think, really made a strong point about, if we're going to ask people to do things, we should fund it the way we should. And that, yesterday, the commissioner made a strong point. I was pleased to hear about the importance of funding for higher ed and formula funding, and at least increasing funding per FTSC, along with not just enrollment, but inflation. which, this time they're just talking about enrollment, not inflation. But we know even when we do that, we're gauging that from a point where we all would have liked the funding to have been a little bit higher from that point forward as well. So, we have a virtually new House Higher Ed Committee, and so I think they're having to learn a number of things, but I think they're listening. So I think John will have a lot more detail for you, but I think there are some encouraging elements happening that I haven't always heard before, also including money for poor students. That has been raised a lot as well, and there are discussions about the levels of funding for TEOG. So we've been trying to explore some things along that line, and so anyway, I'm always glad to see you guys and taking your time, and so I think probably we should move on to something more productive than just hearing me talk. But I'd be glad to answer any questions as we go along or now, whatever your preference is.
I'll welcome myself late. I apologize. Texas fog in South Texas can be pretty great, as well as road construction. Anyway, yes, thank you. And I think we have some time crunch. The legislature is in session, as everyone knows. And Rose Martinez is here. I think we're going to skip down to her section, which is really 5. And Rose, if you could give us an idea of where CAD and TAC are with the legislature.
Thank you. Well, good morning, Chairman Walker and council members. It's a pleasure to be with you today. And as Dr. Gardner said, it is definitely a busy day. I wish I could cut myself into thirds right now. And the reason I'm coming, batting up first is because I have a CAT quarterly meeting to which Mr. Walker is a part of, so he'll be joining me later as well. So busy day, but I think a good one. Dr. Gardner alluded to that, and I'll share some of that information as well. So I wanted to say that there's much to report. So let's begin with the legislative report, and then I'll talk a little bit about what CAT has coming up in the next couple of months as well, because as is my duty. Well, here are the Cliff Notes version, and I will tell you, I mean, I was literally sitting down an hour and a half ago listening to appropriation, so a lot of this is justizing, so to speak. As this council may know, TAC, CAT, and the Texas Community College Teachers Association joined together last summer to begin to explore and craft state policy priorities. I provided a handout with these asks to the 86th legislature. I'm sure many of you have seen this document before, or at least part of it. I'm pleased to share that funding ask for the 2021 biennium, which includes the additional $113 million over what is HB1 and SB1, is included here. The House and the Senate has been extremely open to working with community colleges and addressing our funding ask. That is to say that last week, the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Article 3, chaired by Greg Bonin, approved an increase of $51 million for community college funding. The new funds were in addition to the amount included in the introduced bill, which already had provided an increase of $24 million for the 2021 biennium. That was our ask, okay? Today's action, or not today's, this was, the subcommittee constitutes a total increase of $75 million when you look at those two amounts over the current biennium. If you looked at the subcommittee and what they adopted the following: that core operations would increase by $3.8 million for a total of $1.44 million per college district. They recommended that student success points increase by $47.2 million, our ask, for a total of $53.2 million. That effective rate got us to that success point rate that we had been wanting, $215. That was a big win, folks. Our contact hour funding remains at the level in the introduced bill. Funding is increased by $18 million above the current biennium. This is the House side. Today, I was very happy and pleased to report that those 3 items were adopted. They were adopted by the full Appropriations Committee. So we are sitting very well on our House side. That is to say, we have a lot of work to be done on the Senate side, and then also with our property tax bills that are up in front of us. The subcommittee discussed the possibility of providing additional funding towards TOG. I think John Wyatt may have more information on that. I believe it was put in Article 11, but I'll defer to John. So I want to also say the following. There was a Texas Tribune event today. So some of our TAC members were there, or some of our TAC staff and members were there. Schaefer made it a point, Representative Schaefer made it a point to say that success points make a difference. Every faculty has become an advisor. Community colleges embraced outcomes-based funding, and this is good government. Actually, that was at the Appropriations Committee. My apologies. Donna Howard stated, performance-based funding is a positive influence. It's important to provide the necessary funding. That is, she was talking about that $250 in essence, making sure that the legislature is funding us at an amount that we can provide the support necessary for our students to be successful. So those were very positive things that came out of that Appropriations Committee discussion just like an hour and a half ago. And I wanted to share them just by saying that we're doing a great job in terms of making sure that our legislators understand the value of success points, that we are doing we're doing all we can to make sure our students meet those metrics, that our support staff is there to encourage them and to advise them properly. In terms of where we go from here, we have, I will just share, at the House Ways and Means Committee that met on February 27th, we had Clarendon College's President Robert Riza testify, and also Alamo College's trustee Roberto Zarate testify, and that went very well. I will say, though, we were waiting from, I would say, 7:30 a.m. in the morning, and I believe they testified somewhere around 9 p.m. It was a very long meeting, to say the least, but it was well received, and there was expressions there that we will work with you in terms of the community colleges. You will find that TAC and CAT's position on the property tax bills are to remain neutral. And much of that is because we found that by having that stance, we've been able to have conversations, hard and easy conversations with our legislators, and that has been a plus. For those that have gone against it, hasn't always been as easy. And so I will tell you that the strategy is working thus far, and we're having those conversations, and they're open to working with us in terms of either looking at us as a small district or some sort of exemption. That is basically where we are at right now. We have other meetings, obviously, to follow. I will say at the Texas Tribune event today, Chairman Turner of the House Higher Education Committee expressed the need for community colleges to be exempted. Those were his words from property tax reform. So there are a lot of great discussions, great moments coming from our legislators, knowing that the property tax reform bill could hit us in a difficult way where it might increase our student tuition and fees, and they're hearing us. We've got a lot more work to do, but today has been a good day thus far, and I wanted to share that good news with you on behalf of TAC and CAT, and let you know that both the trustees and regents from our CAT community and TAC are working very closely together to have that same alignment and message. If I can pivot, I do want to say that CAT has been really going full steam with several things. We've helped with TAC provide legislative advocacy training sessions. This is the first time ever. We've had roughly 30 people go through those sessions that include both trustees and CEOs. Some of our new CEOs have participated, and some of our new and more seasoned trustees, and that has gone very well. It's the first time we've done that. We had 3 sessions that were available through webinar and in person. So I encourage you, the next session that comes around, because we are basically done with those, to bring your trustees and CEOs to the table, because it's been very well worth it. In terms of upcoming events, we will probably have our first regional meeting at a community college. I'm not at liberty to say where, but it will be in the northern region. And this is our opportunity to provide professional development to our trustees and regents, so we're very excited about that. We will also be having our CAT conference June 14th and 15th. We will have sessions by Alamo College and Toyota on their great partnership, and CAST STEM, I believe, is the model program, or STEM CAST model, which helps students gain skills to be employed by the Toyota Motors down there. And we will have many other nationally recognized speakers there. So I encourage you to let your fellow trustees and regents know, and CEOs, where you're welcome as well. And with that, I conclude my remarks.
Anyone have any questions or comments concerning Rose's presentation? Those who are attentive watching this on video, TAC is Texas Association of Community College, and CAT is Community College Association of Texas Trustees.
Sorry about that, yes.
Anyway.
And Mr. Cantini, the meeting will be held, the conference will be held in Austin, because we will just be hopefully wrapping up session June 14th and 15th at the Westin Austin at the Domain. We look forward to probably announcing that website link Monday latest, if not tomorrow, Friday. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
And I might add, I went to the one last year, and it was probably one of the better conferences, and it was attended by both professional staff and trustees, and they had breakout sessions, and it was very well appreciated by staff, presidents, and trustees.
Thank you, Chairman.
It's my understanding that Julie may have some time problems, so we might put her shift down to number 8 to have a presentation on community college data trends.
We have not approved the minutes.
Oh, okay.
Good morning. It's nice to be here with all of you today. I thought you might be interested in some of our fresh off the press's data about community colleges. We've been very busy in the Strategic Planning and Funding Division over the last several weeks as our new data has come in and been certified in terms of our FY 2018 completions and our fall 2018 enrollments. So I put together a short presentation for you, and I beefed it up with a little dual credit data, because I know folks are always interested in seeing what we look like in terms of our dual credit students. But I do have some overall data in terms of where we are on our plan metrics. One thing I did want to mention, and let's see if we can set this up as an actual PowerPoint here. There we go. One thing I did want to mention is that some of the data that I'm going to share in terms of where we are with the plan, it's just coming in. You might be aware that we do a progress report on the plan that we present to our board in June and July. There are some data that we have not received yet related to the plan, so what I'm going to share with you is what we have so far. It's not what we've been sharing with the legislature. We've been sharing with them the full the complement of our metrics from 2017, the ones that have been completed. So some of this will be updates to what you might have seen. So let's start with our plan, goals, and targets in terms of where we are. And you can see we do have 2018 data for several things. In terms of our overall educated population goal, which is our 60 by 30 Texas overarching goal, and that's that 60% of our young adults ages 25 to 34 will have a degree or certificate by 2030. We've moved up another 1.2 percentage points on that. So we've gone from 42.3% for the state for that population to 43.5%. And that's encouraging because we need to grow about 1.3. If we did spread it out over the time evenly, we'd need to grow about 1.3 percentage points a year. So we're looking good in terms of that metric. And that data comes from the American Community Surveys. And it's actually, there's a bit of a lag for that. So we just received that in the fall for 2017 data, but we include it with our 2018 metrics. In terms of overall, for our completions, we're up a little less than we'd like to be. We're at 341,307 completions, so we didn't have the growth that we would have liked to have seen for that. And you'll see in a later slide some of our percentage growth there. We don't yet have the information about the high school graduates enrolling in higher education. March or April is usually when TEA sends us the file for the 2018 high school graduates, so we haven't received that yet, but we hopefully we'll get it from them soon. I think they've been very busy with the session this year, so I'm anticipating it might be a little on the later side. But we will have that data for our official final report that we'll present to the board in June. And also in terms of who we find working or enrolled, we don't have the information for that yet. For student loan debt to first-year wage, you can see we're holding steady at 59%, and if you recall, that is a goal that was set to where the state made the commitment to try not to go above the 60%, which is where we were when we first began this process. And we've got some good news for excess semester credit hours. We're down by 2 for that, so we're really pleased about that. In terms of our undergraduates completing with debt, we're actually at 45.8%, so that's good news too. So here's some information about the two-year institutions in terms of where we are with these metrics. So for our total completions, we're up by just 1%, but it's higher for our Hispanic and our African American students, so we were pleased to see that. It's a little bit lower for our male population. That's another one of our targets in the plan. And for our economically disadvantaged students, we're up 1.8% at our two-year institutions. In terms of those folks we find working or enrolled within 1 year. Actually, it looks like we just got an update for that, and that's just up a little bit. We always see a little higher percentage for this for our community colleges than we do for our 4-year institutions, and some of that is our community college students tend to stay and work in the state. We don't have the data yet for those who are out of state. Yes, David?
The economically disadvantaged, based upon the numbers you have here, it looks like it actually decreased.
Oh, it does. And Jenna, I'm going to... That could have been an oversight. So we'll go ahead and check on that. Did you have?
So the percent change, that should be a negative.
It should be a negative, so we missed that. Okay.
Yep, the associate degree level is a decrease this year.
Well, thank you, David, for pointing that out. So we've seen a decrease there. You can see this also reflects that, and again, this is hot off the presses, so I apologize for that. This data has just come in. The student loan debt to first-year wage is just up slightly, a very small amount for our community colleges. It hovers around 40% for our two-year schools. For excess semester credit hours completed, I'm very pleased to see that we're down 2 semester credit hours for the community colleges, so that's definitely good news. I know there's a lot of efforts happening at our two-year institutions in terms of trying to reduce those excess SCH. And then in terms of the percent with debt, good news there is that that's actually down 1.8%. This is for all of our completions. These are the graphs that we have online on 60by30text.com, and we've gone in and populated those with the new information that I've just shared with you. So this in graphic form shows where we are in terms of our completions. That you might be interested to see that the associate degrees were the area where we had the largest percentage increase between 2015, when the plan baseline was, and 2018. So that's encouraging that we're seeing growth in that area. Overall, we were at 2% increase for our level 1 and level 2 certificates, 9% for our bachelor's, and 7% for our master's. Those associates were up 13%. Here's a trend line that shows the 2-year college degree and certificate completions. You can see compared to 2000, we are awarding a lot more degrees and certificates to students in the state. So again, we're seeing progress there. You see, we see a little bit of a slowdown between 17 and 18, and hopefully we'll be able to accelerate in that area moving forward. Our 2-year college fall enrollment is the highest that we've been. We had a peak in 2011 during the Great Recession, and it started to drop after that, and then we've seen it move up. So we're at 758,000 enrollments for fall 2018. And here's some information about our 2-year college graduation rates. We've really seen improvement here. It's something that we, in fact, presented to our board in terms of our graduation rates for our 2 and our 4-year institutions in June. But you can see very large percentage increases. I think especially looking at that 3-year rate that was 10.8% in 2000, and it's up to 23.3%. And we've been trying to spread the word that the community colleges are really focusing on improving these completions. I think the success points have certainly contributed to some of these improvements. So I wanted to share that with you. The 6-year grad rate, I think it's important to point out, one reason we do a 6-year rate for our 2-year colleges is because we are able to include those students who transfer, who are pursuing a 4-year degree, and to do 3 and 4 years generally isn't enough for those students. We do have some students who complete in 4 years who transfer, but we do the 6-year rate so you can see the difference there for bringing in those bachelor's degree earners. In terms of the excess semester credit hours, as I said, we've seen those decrease. You can see they came down 1 from 15 to 16. We're flat from 16 to 17, and we saw the 2-point drop from 17 to 18. Again, that's something that's in our plan. It's a target. We think it's really important, and we're pleased to see those numbers moving. So dual credit enrollment, and I do have a few extra slides on dual credit. Yes.
One point about
Sure.
because it may not be evident, because we started the 6-year rate well before this, but as you can see, I mean, it held steady for a long time, so hitting this 36.9, I think, is particularly important to note. That's a huge increase. I wanted to call a little bit more attention
Yes,
to that.
thank you. Yeah, we definitely saw a big jump from 17 to 18. And we also saw increases across the board at our public institutions. So I think all of our institutions in the state can be proud of the work that's been done there. And especially in terms of getting students out more efficiently. And I think when you look at the differences in terms of the excess SCH, students are being more efficient. They're taking the courses, at least more than in the past, the courses that they need. And we know we have a lot of work to do here in terms of transfer, but we're definitely seeing improvements, and that does tie into the improved 3-year rates for our 2-year completion and the 6-year rates for the, and it's not just, and I shouldn't just point to transfer, but I think pointing to overall student pathways, guided pathways, that type of work has led to these reduced hours and led to students completing in a shorter amount of time.
Again, also as far as the 6-year, at first I thought, goodness gracious, 6 years in 2-year colleges, but what I think most community, or some community college, and us will see, we'll have someone who starts out, jobs will boom, they'll go get a job, there's a little slump, and then they come back. So I think it's not insignificant figure, and it's something we should be proud of, that we are able to get these people back in the classroom after they've put money in their pocket.
Absolutely, and as I said, a lot of that 6-year rate, those are folks, that increases folks earning bachelor's degrees, but it would be interesting to go back and look and see how many of those later ones are folks who were stopouts who have come back to the two-year colleges. So that would be a good thing for us to take a look at.
And that also includes the folks who are going part-time that
Yes.
could not have finished in 2 years. So
And
there's two great factors there.
Yes. Now, when we do graduation rates, we look at first-time, full-time students when they start. But we do have some of those students who start first-time, full-time, and their patterns may change. Something might come up. And that's more likely to happen at a two-year. You're probably aware that about half of the two-year college students start part-time and half start full-time. Our full-time rates always look better than the part-time rates if we start with how students begin. But we do, at two-year colleges, we might be more likely to see a student take a semester where they go part-time and then come back full-time. So
That's something people have missed really frequently when they look at this is the first-time full-time is the most forgiving rate.
Yes.
So then when you look at, and what Julie said is they can go full and part-time. That happens at universities too. It's more likely to happen at community colleges, but if you just did all students or did part-time students, that rate, as you know, would go down, expectedly so. And not to mention, you don't know, especially when you get to the part-time, it's hard to know really why they're there, even though there's a intent flag. But, I mean, they could well be there, just as we occasionally have sent folks to ACC to take a software course. They could show up in the data if you weren't including full-time students, and there's really no intent. And they, as you know, they might have a PhD.
Yeah, and I think, the focus in the plan, of course, is completions, where we bring everyone in, whether they've been there 10 years or two, but it's important to look at both of those pieces of information to understand what's happening at our institutions. So let's jump into dual credit, because I think this is an interesting story this fall. We saw a very large increase, as you can see here, over 30,000 student enrollments. And in fact, this does not show 2017. I actually asked the analyst who does this to drop off the interim years because it was getting very crowded, but we were pretty flat from 16 to 17. So we've seen about a 30,000 student increase from fall 2017 to fall 2018. And it's interesting because if you look in our accountability system for the enrollments at the community colleges from last fall to this fall, if we remove the dual credit, there actually is a very, very slight drop in enrollments. You add the dual credits, we're up about 30,000 students. So our dual credit enrollments are almost 1 in 4 students now at our community colleges. So we've definitely seen some real changes. This includes all of our institutions here, but here it is where we look at the two-year institutions. And so you can see it's still a pretty small percentage of our dual credit that's happening at the universities, but that has grown over time. We couldn't even fit the numbers in back in 2000 and 2002, but we've seen growth there, but we've certainly seen exponential growth at our two-year colleges.
And I don't know if it's contained in the report, but did you or were you able to disaggregate the dual credit by early college, high school, the P-TECH, or any of those kind of unique programs?
That's an excellent question. I've actually serve on a task force that the TAC put together, Texas Association of Community Colleges put together to look at dual credit data, and they also invited TEA. It's only recently that TEA has begun to collect really detailed information about the different types of dual credit academies. They've been collecting for maybe 3 or so years in terms of who was at an early college, high school, but just last year they began differentiating the P-TECHs from the traditional early college, high schools, and I know I think they've got 3 different designations. So it's only going to be moving forward that we're going to start to have those differences. In fact, we don't have that information here at the coordinating board in terms of where the students were, but TEA is producing some information from their data about enrollments at the early college, high schools. And that's something I'm sure TAC would be happy to share as they receive it from TEA. But we just collect if someone's in the dual credit courses and can't know with the data that we have whether someone's at an early college, high school. I believe the TEA data was provided for the study that was done by RAND, and I wish I could tell you off the top of my head. I think there's some different ways people have looked at those numbers for who's at early college, high school, and who's not. So I wouldn't want to venture to share some numbers because there's different ways of looking at it. But we can bring something to you.
But even in addition to some of these unique academies like innovative cluster academies, it might bear to take a look, and I was having a conversation with a colleague about now, even in terms of dual credit, you have the academic dual credit, and now you're moving into technical dual credit outside of these academies. So that might bear some interest as well.
That's absolutely right. And in fact, one thing that we agreed to do at the last meeting that we had with this group was to take a look at the dual credit hours that were coming in the technical areas and the technical courses. Traditionally, we'd grown from about 10% to 15% of our enrollments where students did at least one technical dual credit course. We haven't finished the analysis. This was very recent that we were asked to do this, but we're looking at also how many students had only semester credit hours in a technical course, how many had them in only in academic, and how many in both. But the other thing that we've had an analyst do on staff that we're going to see if we can expand. She's done it for some select colleges, but we're going to try to expand it for the state, is take a look at, for the students who did at least 75% of their hours in technical, what did their patterns look like in terms of enrolling in college and completing some kind of a technical award versus the students who do at least 75% academic. Because what we've seen is a lot of students who appear to be looking to earn some kind of an academic credential, we'll see them picking up some technical courses. And sometimes it's that BCIS course. You know, there are some courses where they need to take it for high school credit, so they'll pick it up for dual credit, but they're not really a technical student. They're just picking up a course in that area. So we're looking more and more closely at what's happening with the technical, and we do get some of that information. Yeah.
Rex needs to say, but before he says that, we tend to pass over this very quickly. We've talked to TEA and other folks. There's a real problem in that parents and students don't always understand there's a difference between the CTE dual credit and the academic dual credit, number one, in terms of who can enroll and then what you can do with it afterwards. And we think they need to know the difference. I was told by a colleague at TEA they tried to do that, but some people thought it was an attempt to suggest that CTE wasn't worthwhile, which wasn't the intent, but students need to know you don't have to be college ready for the CTE dual credit, and it won't transfer to university. So you may have reason, but you just need to know, so the academic universities, need to accept that. But the CTE, they're not. So we need to clarify that going forward so parents know, because we think there's going to be a big expansion of CTE. Rex, you've been wanting to say something.
Oh, yeah, just a couple of quick comments about the distinction between the four categories of early college, high school versus traditional dual credit. For a long time, there was an issue with separating early college, high schools that were within a school because they were all under the same PEIMS number. If they're in the same high school, they were in the same PEIMS number. If they were a separate early college, high school located on a college campus, then they were their own high school, they had their own PEIMS number. But the school within a school didn't have it, and so there was no distinction there. But they have, in the last couple of 3 years, they've actually gotten much better and working on trying to identify who's in each one of those four flavors of early college, high school, as opposed to the other. And one thing to keep in mind about CTE credit is that students who need a fourth year of math can sometimes use CTE courses to satisfy their fourth year of advanced math, which is somewhat of a misnomer in a lot of ways. But that does lead to the phenomenon of students taking CTE courses who probably have, at least at that point in time, have really no intention of going the CTE route. But since they can use it for their advanced credit otherwise, then they will do that. So I think there's a lot of issues with that need to be sorted out along the lines that Dr. Gardner was talking about in terms of what is CTE versus academic and what do both of those feed into, and really make sure that everybody understands that. Either one of them are good paths to follow, but just make sure that everybody knows what they are and what the student needs to do to follow that path then.
So this slide just is something we frequently use, and we've updated it so you can see for 2018 what the demographics of our dual credit students look like. And clearly, it's changed a lot since 2000, when it was a much smaller percentage of our high school students who were participating in dual credit opportunities. So again, important to look at this in terms of what the representation of some of these different demographic groups versus their overall representation. I think our African American students are still lower than their overall representation in high schools. In terms of our white and Hispanic students, I believe it's closer, and we can provide those if anyone's interested in terms of the overall population. In fact, I believe on our 60by30text.com website, we had a hot topic at one point where we showed overall population versus dual credit, and that's still available. But I chose this slide just to show you how we've really seen some changes in terms of who's participating over time.
And a key strategy in 60 by 30 is making sure economically disadvantaged students have greater access to dual credit.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, I know there's been a effort to provide dual credit more broadly. I mean, it was in urban areas, things of that sort. Does this reflect that it's being spread out to more high schools, or can you differentiate between more in a previously dual credit school versus new dual credit school?
We've looked at that. I haven't brought a slide today, and actually something a lot of people don't realize is that there's actually been traditionally over time a lot of dual credit offered in our rural areas, because for our rural schools that was often the only way that high school students at these little small schools could get access to some of the upper level courses, to physics, to chemistry, to some of those type things. So we actually when I think about when I was working on dual credit issues 8 or 10 years ago, we actually saw maybe a higher rural representation. Obviously, those are very small areas, but we saw quite a few students participating. But we had little pockets around the state with less participation. Now, when we look at the dual credit data, most of our traditional high schools across the state are offering dual credit. If you see some of our smaller like the JJAEPs or some of the various specialty type of schools, and I'm sorry, I forget the name for some of those alternative schools, I guess you would say. They often have a lower rate, or we might not see students doing dual credit. But some of our charter schools, we don't see students doing dual credit. But at most of our larger schools, we absolutely are finding students are participating in these opportunities. Based on what we can see, we know students are participating. Maybe for some of them, they're doing online dual credit. It might not be something that's happening at their schools, but we do know that there are a lot of opportunities available. Now, you can go beyond that and question, well, what's the breadth of opportunities? And at some schools, are there just 1 or 2 courses that are available to students? At other schools, are there a lot more opportunities? And we haven't looked as deeply at that, but I do know there are some differences in terms of what's available out there. And the other thing with the technical, that's a challenge too in terms of access, because the types of technical programs that are out there often require special classroom, special equipment. I know Rex frequently says this, it can be expensive dual credit to offer. So I'm not sure if the opportunities for access to that type of dual credit are really fully available around the state. I know Chancellor Reeser has started offering some of those programs for students, but I think there's probably bigger gaps there in terms of access.
Julie,
yes.
I'd like to bring up the rural part of the dual credit. Of course, Howard College, we are a rural college and a rural serving college. And when you speak to dual credit in the rural areas, yes. And I think Pam would probably jump in and say that they would do the same. Because in some instances, that is going to be the only opportunity that some of those young people have as far as a college opportunity, or even thinking that that's something that could be in their future. And so I know we have for a very long time made a very active effort to get into our small schools. We are mainly, we have 26 schools, 13 counties, and most of our schools are 1As, 2As, 3As. We have very few of the one large, and then the 4A couple. And so it is an effort. We've done it through ITV for years. We moved into online. We do, in some instances, if they're close enough to one of our campuses, they all come to a campus, or we have adjunct faculty that are credentialed from their area, or even send people sometimes. So, yes, I think you would be exactly right that the rural colleges probably, as far as reaching out and as far as part of our enrollment, because we're at 50% dual credit, but it's also because we are getting out into our effort is to get into every little school district that we can to get that in those young people's mind that is an opportunity for them.
Thank you. Okay, well, here's some more hot off the presses information. We just ran the update, and the reason this says 09, 15, and 18 is because I used this slide when I did a presentation 2 years ago for this group on dual credit, and we were looking at at that point we had data from 2009 and 2015, so I just asked that it be updated for this year. And you can see that we really have grown in the last 3 years in terms of those students who are completing a credential by the time they graduate from high school. So the numbers were quite small in 2009, under 400 students for the certificates and the associates, and now we're up to over 1,000 students who in 2018 earned a certificate by the time they graduated from high school, and over 3,000 students who earned an associate degree, and that's about 5% of the, and I'm trying to remember now what the percentages are, but I think that's of the dual credit students who were enrolled. So again, I think the numbers there are what matter, and of course we include these in terms of when we look at our goal for completion. We include these completions for the students who have taken dual credit and finished by the time they finish high school. Okay, and another question that we had a couple of years ago, because HB 505 had just gone through and allowed increased access for our younger students, was what does the data look like in terms of our students who are our younger students having access? We don't have the data about grade students are in, so we have just used age as a proxy in this case. And so you can see that although most of our enrollments are still clearly in our students who are 16, 17, and of course the 18 will capture some of those seniors who turn 18. We have seen definitely some increased growth in terms of that younger student population. So I wanted to share this so people were aware that, in fact, some of the growth has been in the younger students, but increased growth across the board in terms of our age groups. And then finally, I had included a slide for where some of this information came from. Our 60by30text.com, we've updated in areas where we do have the new information, so you can go online. Some of the charts and graphs that I shared, you can actually download from there for presentations, which I think is helpful. Our accountability system, of course, much of the data came from there. And we are, as we speak, working very hard to produce the 2019 Texas Higher Education Almanac that will include some of these metrics that we've talked about, and that should be ready, we hope, late April, early May. So we're working hard to get that done. I did want to take a moment to thank all of the institutions in the state who worked very hard this year to get data to us in a timely manner. We'd realized that we'd had some delays, and it was causing some problems with getting data out to our accountability system. So we initiated some new processes, and schools really rose to the challenge. And I think we were about a month earlier than usual in terms of getting our almanac data out. That's part of, I'm sorry, in terms of getting our accountability data out, part of why we have some of these numbers earlier than we usually have. And also, we've asked our institutions to review almanac data. We were able to get that to them early to double check, make sure that we've got accurate data coming from the schools. So I did want to give a shout out to those registrars and reporting officials who sometimes don't get a lot of notice in terms of the important work they do, because they really did a fantastic job this year in terms of getting the data to us in time. And a lot of this is due around Christmas. So for a lot of people, that meant coming in over the holidays or coming back early to get this data certified and into us so we could update our numbers for 2018. So thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, and I had one slide. I did want to put a plug in also for the regional work that's happening around the state. Dr. Jenna Cullinane-Hagee has been helping with that. I think she's still here. Yes, she's still here. The efforts are ongoing. Many of your institutions, perhaps all of them, are participating in those regional efforts to try to reach the goals of 60 by 30 techs. We've got K-12 involved, higher ed involved, workforce involved. I believe Dr. Hagee presented to you about the work that's going on, but I just wanted to make sure people are aware this is ongoing, and we're just really pleased with all of the participation from the regions. And then finally, I'm happy to answer any questions. And I know we've had a good back and forth. Is there anything else or any other data that may be of interest?
This is certainly pretty eye-opening. Would you be able to share that with us, or is this still too preliminary to email the PowerPoint?
Oh, you've got the PowerPoint. No, I'm happy to share this. We'll make that one correction in the place where Dr. Gardner, with his eagle eyes, noticed that we had gone in the wrong direction. And I will clarify what that percentage is on the degrees. I'm sorry, I forgot what we were doing. I think that's percentage of all the dual credit students.
Thank you.
I think it would be good to, I think it's fairly clear, but to make sure you indicate where these are different numbers in the legislature.
Yes, I will do that for sure. Yes, exactly. And again, we wanted to bring the legislature the numbers from our progress report this summer where we were able to include all the metrics, but as I said, our data came in early this year, and we just kind of wanted to give all of you a heads up on where we are with some of these metrics. And we have updated our various websites with the new data when we have it. Great.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, please do.
Hello, Dr. Jenna Cullinane-Hagee. I just wanted to add on the regional targets that each of your institutions submitted institutional targets in that kind of regional process. And so if you have any questions about the numbers that were submitted for your individual institution or for your region, I'd be happy to share that with you, and just want to make sure that folks from leadership all the way through the institutions are aware of the numbers that came in for those.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We are going to get on schedule and do the minutes, but not now. We still have some scheduling problems. So are we ready for 7? We'll have a discussion. Is it A-N-D-I or Andy, or how do you pronounce it?
Yeah, I'll let
Andy.
I'll let Kristen get into that. That's a branding thing, and I'm not 100% sure on what they're doing. And
It's the way it sounds, Andy.
Kristen Kramer is going to present instead of Jarrell.
Okay. Thank you.
Good morning. I count as CRS staff on your agenda. My name is Kristen Kramer. It's been a while since I've been before you all. I am the Deputy Assistant Commissioner of College Readiness and Success. And we are, again, in light of trying to be efficient and make sure that John has a chance to get in here before he has to go downtown, we are pushing together the two College Readiness and Success agenda items. Yes. Thank you. I tried to clean up my PowerPoint for you all a little bit since the one you received, although I'm now thinking it's not as nice as what I sent you. One can work on something too much. So to begin, I would like to start, despite the order of the title, I would like to start with our financial wellness, also known as financial literacy. And let's see, how does this? Yeah. So of course, the financial literacy and wellness activities, which we briefly discussed with you last time, we presented to you more as a conceptual framework. is meant to address student debt, which of course is intricately tied to student post-secondary completion. I will not review the various strategies except to look at ways in which we can support financial aid programs to make them more effective for students, and part of that is by educating the students who are applying to and matriculating into higher education. So you may have seen this slide before, our financial literacy and wellness planning. Part of our messaging is to remind constituents, students, parents of the value of higher education, but to speak of it in monetary terms. Part of this is a sort of return on investment model. Along with that is continuing to educate students on financial aid opportunities and the importance of applying through the FAFSA. I have to say from personal experience, even though my parents went to college, when I went, I only applied once, and I didn't know you had to apply every year. So I only got 1 year of financial aid. You know, little things like that can make a difference. So along with raising awareness, which I think we've been doing a very good job of in working with our high school students over the years, but continuing to increase FAFSA applications, as well as helping students both understand how to manage debt, how much debt is responsible, and how to integrate that into their financial planning throughout their, both in their choice of major, but also throughout their higher education career and beyond. So we have several strategies. One brings us, the beginning, of course, is continuing to communicate and disseminate information on financial aid and literacy. Our financial literacy development is, we have not been doing a lot of work on that to date. We've worked with the, what is it, the Financial Literacy Advisory Council? Thank you. I'm often not very good at the names. That was overseen by Chad Pulls, one of my colleagues here at the coordinating board. And we got many recommendations from them, but one of which was to do a better job in our communications and helping students, counselors, but also higher ed institutions both understand better what financial literacy means as well as communicate among themselves. I'm going to skip number 2 and come back to that. Part of this also is working with, we're working with higher ed institutions to create financial literacy and wellness programs. We think of wellness as inclusive of what can institutions do in their policies, in their financial aid policies, and how they work with students in deciding what the best way to manage their loans if they are taking out loans, as well as looking into opportunities for emergency aid and how to better communicate its availability. We've seen great effect, of course, among institutions who are able to manage emergency aid programs and processes, really helping students in that last get over a hump, a repair of a transmission, for instance. Financial literacy, of course, is much more focused on students and parents and how they can better manage their opportunities and options moving forward so a student can complete a higher education degree. Part of getting the information out is to both train more folks in being able to do effective and accurate financial counseling, but also creating virtual spaces for sharing that information, as well as virtual activities in the form of modules. So you will see that as our first on the activities. We are in the process of identifying financial aid modules, ultimately to be tied into financial literacy modules that would be student-facing as well as for the use of counselors. We've been in conversation with the Texas OnCourse work, in part because they have already done certain types of financial aid modules that we think are possible to adapt for also a higher education audience. We are collaborating with Generation Texas to promote a financial aid literacy month. We are identifying springtime financial aid month to, financial literacy month, to think better about what sort of choices are they making in their higher education, and how that should ultimately be paid for both during and after. Our newest project, I guess you would call it, is to bring together Financial Wellness Learning Collaborative. This is not the same as the advisory committee that brought together disparate groups. This is focused more on bringing in particular individuals from your campuses and from university campuses who have put out effective programming on their campus to around financial literacy and wellness. So we want to bring the expert practitioners here in Texas who can together start identifying some of the best policies and practices and programs to help put together toolkits around those practices to share more broadly across institutions. We sent out a request in at the end of February, and gave just a couple of weeks to all of you to, if you had a nominee for the collaborative or if someone felt like they would be a good candidate for participating, to send us your nominees, and we've received a few so far. I think we have a deadline of March 13th. So, let me back up. So right here we have the idea, the last bullet is integration of the financial literacy and wellness conversations into our virtual advising project. This virtual advising project is bigger than financial literacy. It ties overall into our completion goal, both with bringing in high school students, as Advise Texas does, into higher education, and helping students by answering questions they may have, as well as returning students. As you all well know, our Grad Texas project has been focusing on the number of stop-outs we've had in recent years, well, that we've always had, I suppose, and targeting those students with information and encouraging them to return to higher education. The virtual advising program is, or project, maybe is a better way of thinking about it, is driven by artificial intelligence and chatbot technology.
This is kind of transition to 7.
Oh, yes, sorry. This is transitioning to, what is it, 7? Thank you. Thank you, Gary. This is agenda item 7. Actually, if you want me to hold on for a moment, if you have any, no, I can keep going. Everyone's good with that? Okay. So the virtual advising project is driven by artificial intelligence and essentially a chatbot technology. I think at least probably most of you, if not your children, would use chatbot technology whenever you have a question about how to make your smartphone do something you need it to do. So rather than talking to someone on the phone, often there is a text box on a web page where you can ask questions back and forth. In the beginning, that's typically managed by a machine. So typically a machine is answering, computer, I guess that's sort of a machine, will be answering your questions. But ultimately, you will have questions that aren't quite answerable by the machine, and oftentimes it's a fairly seamless transfer to an in-person advisor who is able then to more directly answer your questions. This is essentially the vision of the chatbot that we are in partnership with the University of Texas at Austin, specifically with the Advise Texas program and their technological supports on campus to develop this tool. The University of Texas is working with a vendor, AdmitHub, which has made these sorts of chatbots for universities, say Georgia State, as well as Texas A&M, West Texas A&M, I believe, is also using such a chatbot on their website. Those are internal to their system, specific to the institutional information and needs of their students. This is, of course, quite an ambitious project because we're looking to serve all the students or potential students in the state of Texas. The idea is a student does not have to rely on trying to reach someone on the phone or dig deep into websites to try and understand what their options are. These provides an opportunity for in time, when a student has a question, they can go online, they can text, and from their phone, ask their questions and get feedback. So, as you can imagine, developing such a system is rather complex, in large part because getting all of that information, all of the ways to answer a question, managing the multiple ways one receives a question can be quite daunting and take quite a while. We have our first efforts, or I should say UT's first efforts with our guidance, is to collect information that either we already have at the coordinating board and integrating it into the system around admissions deadlines and so on, but also to cull information from your websites. We sent out a memo at the beginning of February to all higher ed institutions in the state to request a point person, actually multiple point people in admissions office and financial aid primarily, to help us do quality checks to make sure the information is accurate. As we roll out the system and continue to perfect it, we'll be able to anticipate better the kinds of questions students will provide and come up with better answers. So the artificial intelligence both teaches itself and we teach it. In the background, we will have advisors who are behind the scenes, and questions will be referred to them. We do not yet have a 24-hour advisor. That's a little further downstream, but we do have anticipated advisors being available until around 10 o'clock at night or so. And those are primarily former Advise Texas advisors. So I didn't necessarily read my slides to you, but yes.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
At any point, will those live advisors make some kind of a transfer to the college that student might be interested in?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, this is part of the reason we wanted the contact names and information from each of your higher ed institutions, so that we do have, the advisors and the system have a way of directly transferring the student to who they would best talk to about their questions.
All right, and then let me ask this question. As a part of, again, being a small rural college, sometimes limited on resources, is that something that we will be able to basically market as a part of our advising strategy, that for students to be aware? And then at the same time, that's the reason I was asking the question, if that on the live side, when that happens, if that advisor then will then advise encourage the student then to go to the college that they are going to enroll in.
Okay, I think I started answering the first question, then I lost the second question, I think. Sorry, I shouldn't have been trying to do that. Yes, I see no reason why you couldn't be referring students to the virtual advising system. I mean, we want it to be used, obviously. We want it to be a resource. Its sophistication, I think, will grow over time. I think we were very excited because we thought it would be super sophisticated within a couple months. Well, it looks like that takes a while. And then your next part of your question.
Well, basically, I think you'd already answered it
Okay.
before, but if we market it as something that's something students can do when we're not available.
Certainly.
At night.
Certainly.
Or weekends or something. And then they with that live advisor, would then, if I'm following from your first answer, then they could then advise the student to follow up and to talk with the advisor at the college the next Monday or something like that?
Absolutely. And they may, both the AI system as well as the live advisor would be able to answer at least some of those higher level questions. And the desire, of course, over time is that the AI would get better at answering institution-specific questions. Obviously, it would never replace a campus's advisor. I think we're a long way in the technology on that piece.
Let
Yes,
me
sir.
just emphasize what Kristen just said, is that the nature of artificial intelligence is it continues to learn as you go along. And when you're mentioning people after hours, one of the big benefits Georgia State has noted is the heavy volume and the use of chatbot after hours. Plus, you may have mentioned, and I just missed it, was they found that students are more willing to ask certain questions of chatbots that they're embarrassed to ask live people. And
Absolutely.
it's been very beneficial in terms of those unasked questions that students need to ask. But I do think it's something, as we go forward, we sort of, all people will need to do some little tests themselves to see if chatbot is really leading the way we think it should be. So it's not a miraculous
Yes.
thing in and of itself that you, as with any technology or even human endeavor, you've got to have some evaluation, but everywhere it's been used, there have been big advantages to folks, and this has been at this point, a lower cost endeavor than we thought it might be.
Yes, yes. And I have to reiterate, I'm glad you brought that up, David, because I think there are many people out there who may not even be embarrassed by the question, but are almost disinclined to make the phone call. I know I've had those moments before. So I think we can all relate to that. And it's a student is more apt to reach out if it's a type of technology they're used to using as far as text goes. And Rex, you had something.
So actually, this is a question that follows up, I think, on Dr. Sparks' question about this. And I don't know if I really want to open this can of worms. But,
Thank you, Rex.
But
Yeah.
we always talk about Georgia State in this context.
Right.
And so what you have there is a chatbot, but you have Georgia State's chatbot.
Right.
And
right.
in this case, we're talking about a state of Texas or coordinating board chatbot, if you will. And so I guess part of it is how will the chatbot know to refer a student to Howard College as opposed to referring them to, say, San Angelo State?
Yes.
I mean, it's so, and maybe that's a part of that. I'm sure that
That's
there's something
part
that
of what
comes
we're
up to the learning process.
developing,
But if
yeah.
the student never mentions a specific institution, how would they know?
So the chatbot can ask questions.
I can answer that.
Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah,
thank
the
you.
chatbot will ask.
Right, thank you.
Exactly.
The chatbot will have the ability to know where you are, but based on your IP or your phone location services. And yeah, the bot would know to ask, do you have a specific school in mind?
Mm-hmm.
I will say there's one other thing that this is going to, if we want really rich individual institutionalized responses in a chatbot, we are probably going to have to be willing to provide data to the system in a format that is relatively standardized in order for the bot to learn it quickly.
And go ahead, sorry. No, it's just one thing that you've mentioned is both the people we're working with at UT, but also at MidHub, have been helping us figure out how to or we've together been working to determine how best to structure questions, how to answer them so that it might provoke another question by the student or a clarifying remark, as well as to manage the kinds of expressions that students may use. And when we tested, did a demo, I guess it was with AdmitHub at some point, it was very chatty. I mean, it felt like you were talking to a person. They used emojis, this kind of thing, which was well, it made us smile, let's put it that way. But part of that, creating that knowledge base is the big lift, and this is where we're going to have to work together more so as we move forward, I think.
There are actually some competitions, not in this realm, where chatbots have been developed, and part of the competition is for people to try to identify when you're talking to a person or when you're talking to a chatbot. And a few people are able to distinguish it, but in those competitions I've seen that most of the time they can't distinguish between the two. But it's not going to be perfect in the beginning, and then, one of the concerns is if things change, how do you, in terms of some policy or whatever, how do you get that in there? But if I were at Howard, I would probably sit there and have somebody call in occasionally and ask some questions, just if nothing else, to understand it better. But if you saw any concerns,
absolutely,
to alert. And I think we can't just automatically trust in technology, but I think it can help us. And it's not the same thing, but I'm reminded of a study done by Lauren Schutte at UT talking about a different kind of online presence, but saying that most students get their information online about courses and various things. And so this is not exactly what she was talking about, but a reminder that this is the world of many, if not most of our students now. And so it reaches them where they live. And I don't know if you've noticed on your cell phones, it's telling you how many hours you're spending a day on your cell phone. And sometimes I'm surprised.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm trying to get my head around this. Chatbot, so what the type of questions that students would be asking would be very general type advising questions, to where you all would refer, or Chatbot would refer the curriculum type questions. I mean, because you're going to get a student that's never, they don't know what they want to do.
Right.
And so they need that very basic 101, more general questions, personality type fitting.
I agree, yes.
And then you've got students who are in their second semester and trying to figure out a plan to finish. So I'm trying to get my head around that.
There are going to be questions, I think, well, we've become aware of the nature of questions that students will send because we did a brief stopgap several months ago that we put online on our website on a landing page for Grad Texas that just said, if you have questions about returning to college, give us your name and best way to get in touch with you, and here's a comment box if you want to say something about your question. We were stunned that we were getting questions. I mean, we thought maybe we'd get one a month. Who's going to stumble across this? But we ended up getting a fair number of questions, and transfer questions, going back, saying, it looks like I only need 2 classes. Who do I talk to at UT? Is it possible to do these online? So I think a chatbot could answer yes, it would be possible to do this online. But the degree of conversation that, say, staff here who were managing these questions, which was a bit of a lift, we had to do a lot of research just to answer some of the questions. Certainly that's a whole nother level that we would expect that the advisors will be trained to be able to talk about transfer, about the kinds of questions to ask the institution they're intending to return to be able to say, well, these are the higher ed institutions that offer online programs in the area you're looking for. So I think there a lot more robust information would come through. Certainly, it's not going to be able to answer questions around what courses do I need to complete my major or to graduate. Certainly, this in no way would ever be able, well, I shouldn't say ever, won't be able to replace the humans on the other side of the line on your campuses.
Well, I think
I won't say ever, because who knows?
to replace some of what humans would be doing.
Certainly.
And that's an advantage. And
Absolutely.
And I mean, I know some staff here have actually called some institutions in the state after 4 and can't find anybody after 4 o'clock. I mean, trying to be sort of a secret shopper, just trying to see how this would help.
I would echo David's comment. If you all haven't done this yet, I would highly encourage you to come up with some questions and then do some secret shopping at your campus and say, okay, well, I have a financial aid question. I'm going to call the financial aid office and see what, or even trying some after hours, because it is revealing where you don't ask your administrative assistant to look up the number, but where you try and find it yourself and just try to negotiate your websites, because I think it becomes revealing where there may be obstacles for students, or where things are not as transparent, or where offices close at 5 and most of the calls are coming in afterwards. So.
Just real quickly, one advantage here is Admit Hub. We're not the first people with Admit Hub, so we're not the earliest adopters. So some of the mistakes have been made or some of the issues have been learned, but we're still fairly early. And I just want to mention that the question Rex brought up has always been a little bit of my concern, is you're doing this sort of statewide, and how does it trail out to institutions? And I think that's the area where we're really sort of the early adopter.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
And oh, sorry.
I was just going to
respond this.
piggyback. Actually, you were going in the direction, David, in the direction of my question in terms of implementation, in terms of rollout. What can we be doing at our respective institutions to get out ahead of this? Is there a soft launch,
yes,
if you will, for this? And what are some of those timelines?
Let's see, I put it here somewhere. So soft launch, actually in about a month, end of April. So we are not going to be marketing this statewide in the beginning. We want to do some targeted marketing so that we just capture a smaller group of students and institutions, or we should say areas of the state, to test this on and try to start perfecting the system. This is where getting your contacts from your campuses will be incredibly important, obviously, so to help the system start making sure it has its answers correct in the way that it'll be populating the system, at least in the beginning. So it will be an iterative process, no doubt, but we wanted to make efforts because we'd heard from some of you that, well, there may be information still on the website that may be a little out of date or cached or something like this. So we put into motion having a way to start the quality control early. Obviously, there are going to be errors as we go that we'll have to catch, that you all will have to help us catch. But we are not going to do a full-blown marketing this spring so as to try to mitigate some of those. We don't want to spread errors far and wide, obviously.
Just so I'm clear, perhaps.
Yes, sir.
Is with your soft launch, will there be selected colleges for the soft launch, or will this be broadly for all of it, for every college and university within the state?
Oh, no, it won't be with every college and university in the state at the soft launch. So we are focusing the soft launch on returning student population. And while we will be populating the system with everyone's information, all the institutions' information, we will not be pushing it out to the entire state within that soft launch to try to control, I should say the last I've heard, because we keep negotiating how the best way to move forward on this. Yes, sir. Oh, I misunderstood the question.
Well, part of it, you said you're going to do it in region.
Yes,
That suggests that they're maybe targeted.
absolutely.
They need to know who they are.
Thank you so much.
Right. I understand. And I'm a little nervous to say because I'm not sure if this has changed since the last conversation I was in.
I'll hold you to it.
I'm broadcasting. But let me put it this way. The last conversation we were going to start with the Valley, partly because there were a couple of institutions who were already in the Valley who were already reaching out to students who stopped out of their respective colleges and universities. I don't know where we are on that, frankly.
I think
so.
this is not as straightforward as it needs to be, and I wasn't aware of this until you said this. You're really not talking about rolling it out in a general kind of way, or even just by, you're talking about only for the students who have taken at a community college more than 45 semester credit hours, or at universities more than 90. If you're talking about returning students.
Okay, I should clarify. The data, the knowledge base will be built for the majority of questions that one's going to get about entering college for the first time will overlap a lot with returning college. Obviously, there are many questions that a returning college student will have that are not part of a first-time college student, no question. We are gathering and putting together a knowledge base that is fairly broad, but we'll also then focus on trying to serve the returning student initially, because it will tap into that work that's happening in South Texas. That will be we'll say, the first step in the beta, if you will. And it will then be built up from there and start reaching out directly to other students. So it will be part of the targeted outreach that those colleges are involved in, if that makes
Step back
sense.
and clarify this a little bit and get back to them, because
I'm not making sense.
well, it's a little different than what I've heard, and I think it's maybe a little, could cause.
This is why I didn't want to answer the question.
Because you said returning students, but you also said heavy on sort of entry information, and let's just say we will update you, because I think we've had some other conversations unrelated to this on grad techs that
Right.
this doesn't totally fit with those conversations.
Okay, yes.
There were some vendor presentations by AI companies at
Yes.
the ACCT, and I think a lot of people walked away from those meetings trying to look at the cost associated with implementing that. So are you trying to put something together that community colleges will buy into, or are you making it available to community colleges just across the state without expense?
Right now, it is, I don't want to say is, because it's not an is yet, but once it's available, it will be available to everyone. And at least so far, our development has been relatively low cost, much shockingly so. I think we were expecting the technology piece to be much more expensive than at least it is to date. Where the cost will, over time, show itself is in any backup staffing that we would have. At this moment, we're not asking for funding from any of the public higher ed institutions.
They were reporting fairly high satisfaction rates where they had implemented it. But as I say, the cost associated with it was maybe a deterrent for some schools dipping their toe into it. So thank you for what you're attempting to do here.
It'd be good, this is at the trustee conference you're talking? Okay. Maybe if we could ask Rose, reach out to Rose to see if she can know which vendors were at the national conference. I think that would be useful. But in general, I'm always concerned when there are things that we can potentially do statewide, either through us or through a statewide contract to save money versus everybody spending more money. And so I think at least going forward, we ought to try to work together to reduce the cost and not have too many things that seem to be competing with each other.
Or duplicative.
And there are different ways of doing that, but I'm glad you brought that up because we've actually been talking to our Learning and Technology Advisory Committee about doing some things with textbook publishers statewide rather than individual campuses doing it for certain types of services. So thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you.
I just want to comment. That's a good idea that you brought up, I think, at least pursuing the possibility of having some kind of a statewide vendor, you know, if we could all agree on that, because that's would prevent all of us, you know, each of the community colleges individually trying to reinvent 50 different wheels with multiple vendors. If we could isolate a vendor willing to work with all of us with a reasonable discount or rate.
We'll remember to do that, and I know since it's fairly early, and when we did something with libraries years ago, we got some good deals because they were able to sell that Texas was doing it that we might not have gotten otherwise because of that joint contract. And I think we may still be early enough to help people, you know, market what they're doing elsewhere by giving us some lower prices.
And we did invite a variety of those, the practicing chatbot technology folks. Admit had obviously worked with higher ed institutions already, so they were a little ahead of the field on that. So there's definitely an awareness of continuing to look at what's being offered out among competitors and so on. So the last thing I wanted to say is that we will certainly, we are still in an iterative process of both developing the knowledge base as well as the marketing strategy. This is yet another example of how we build the airplane as we're flying it, as we seem to do pretty much all the time. So we will have probably new and better answers to your questions at the next meeting, and we'll be sure to have it on the agenda. Okay? Thank you. And I'll turn this over to John if he's still able to.
Yes, I think next we'll move to item 4. John Wyatt has a narrow window of opportunity to speak to us. He's, as you all know, is Director of External Affairs and will visit with us about a legislative update.
Good afternoon. I was going to say good morning, but gosh darn it. Good morning. John Wyatt, Director of External Relations here at the Coordinating Board. So I'm going to present an update on where things stand with the legislature, and particularly with some legislative recommendations of ours that impact the sector. I know you heard from Rose earlier today, so if I start to repeat anything you already know, feel free to jump in. So we are almost halfway through the legislative session. So, you know, it's a 5-month session, and so March 15th is the halfway point through the session. And deadlines are starting to fall that are relevant to the consideration of legislation. The biggest deadline we have upcoming is this Friday, at which bills must be filed before close of business on Friday if they're going to be considered by the legislature. So that's an important deadline to at least have that initial bill filing if you're going to have a bill considered during the session. Providing an update on some bills that have been filed and some bills that we know are coming. SB 1192 by Senator West and HB 3042 by Representative Chris Turner have been introduced, and those bills are to implement our Texas Works paid internship program. As you may know, this is a recommendation that we had last session and that we brought back this session. And the proposal is that we would remove the off-campus requirement of the Texas College Work-Study program and replace that with a centralized process at the coordinating board for employers to come to us with the high-quality paid internship opportunities that they want to offer across the state. And so we would contract with those employers. We would, through rules, set standards for what those internships would have to provide the student, and then work with institutions to get interested students into those internship programs. This came out of, actually, we were approached by Amazon before last session, and they were interested in offering paid internship programs with their call centers. But they didn't want to have to deal with 34 universities, 50 community college districts, so they wanted a more centralized approach. So this was our answer to that. We're hopeful that we're going to get it across the finish line this time. Also introduced has been SB 330 by Senator Zaffarini and HB 3137 by Representative Donna Howard. These are bills that would extend TEOG to students in community college baccalaureate programs. As you know, when the legislature expanded the ability of community colleges to offer baccalaureate degrees last session, we created a bit of a financial aid hole in that you can only get TEOG for 75 hours. And actually, if you're in a baccalaureate program, I believe you're not eligible to get it at all. So what we have proposed is that those students in those baccalaureate programs now be eligible to participate in TEOG up to 135 hours or 15 hours beyond the degree's requirements. So we see that as a way of just making sure that those students do have a state financial aid program that's serving their needs. SB 1296 has been introduced by Senator Beverly Powell. This would require students enrolled in academic dual credit to file a degree plan upon 30 semester credit hours. So this arose out of the concern that we had during the interim that we want to make sure that students who are taking dual credit are doing it in a thoughtful, organized manner, so that when students, are accumulating, 30, 40, 50 hours of dual credit, that they know exactly how that credit is going to apply toward their higher education. So our recommendation was to take the current degree plan requirement, which is 30 hours upon arriving at the campus, and apply it to academic dual credit. So Senator Powell has filed that bill. Senator Taylor has filed SB 1324, similar legislation, but it would actually require a degree plan at 15 hours. We're more than happy to work with the senators and the sector in terms of what is the appropriate timing to have that degree plan filed. I will note another difference between those two bills. 1296 would apply to all institutions. 1324 would only apply to dual credit offered through junior colleges. So university dual credit would not be subject to that 15-hour degree requirement. Everybody's favorite topic is transfer, and I think we're going to go down to the wire on this one. Our understanding is that there is legislation that is going to be filed imminently by Chairman Turner and Senator West to offer, it sounds like a kind of a new approach to how the Corps can serve as a transfer vehicle. Specifically, we've termed it a meta-major approach. I believe it's also been referred to as a discipline approach of identifying pathways within the core curriculum that will allow students to take courses that apply within a discipline, not specifically within a major, but within a broader discipline, that will then allow them to kind of have a pathway that will be more likely to transfer when they do transfer to a senior institution. I haven't seen what exactly is going to be filed, but I do understand there's probably going to be a couple of bills filed, and then both houses are interested in having a process wherein they bring in stakeholders and they talk through, with this legislation, what looks good, what should we change. So it sounds like they want to have a process of having a conversation during the session so that we arrive at a final bill that's going to work for everybody. The other thing I'll note is that the appropriators are also hard at work. The Article 3 Subcommittee on House Appropriations has undertaken many of their decisions. We were very encouraged by some of the decisions that they made regarding performance funding. So they increased student success point funding to $215 per point. That was our board's recommendation. And they also increased the TSDC return value formula to a 28.4% return. So we were very gratified that the legislature decided that it wanted to increase its investment in these performance-based formula. And I think what really helped the legislature, well, it's early to say that it's done, but what helped the House committee get there was the results we've seen in terms of the productivity of our community colleges and our technical colleges since this formula went into effect. So that was a powerful argument that carried a lot of weight with the House. The Senate is currently meeting in work group, so we don't know where exactly they are right now. But we're continuing to push on both sides of the Capitol for expanded funding for performance-based models. And I will stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
You know, and this is an item later on, but I ran across an administrative code what our assignment, our tasks are. And one of them is to review the legislative agenda of TAC and CAT and provide legislative recommendation to the board. Rose presented us with their recommendations, which was the funding, an issue on the dual credit and workforce education. Have you been able to work with TAC and CAT? Is there harmony or there's disagreement? Just tell us what that relationship is so that we can sort of fulfill this requirement of ours.
Absolutely. We've been in regular communication with both of those entities. Starting well before the session. So we began to develop our legislative recommendations, it would have been fall of 17. So after that legislative session. And so we have been in communication with TAC about our recommendations, getting their input. And it's a good relationship. I mean, there are areas where, we take maybe a different approach to the same outcome. An example would be, I know part of the TAC recommendation on the degree plan was the 15 hours, whereas we had the 30 hours. And we're continuing to talk to them as legislation is filed, either our recommendations or just legislation that impacts the sector, so that we can have, we can understand where each other are coming from if we do have a difference of opinion. So I would say, we talk to Jacob and Rose regularly, and it's been very helpful for us in understanding the community college perspective, and then tailoring our recommendations to accommodate.
Ron, if I could add, and you know this as do the other members, Jacob and Rose are basically a standing agenda item. I don't know the last meeting that there wasn't, that they weren't on the agenda, but then David, the commissioner, Rex, and the other coordinating board members of the leadership, they hear the conversation. And so when these topics come up, the various points of views and y'all's points of views are all heard, and that gets incorporated into the conversation here at the agency. And so it's a mixing pot, I guess, is my point.
I'm not sure what it's been like in past sessions, but the fact that everybody's speaking with one voice between TAC and CAT and the coordinating board seemed very exciting.
I mean, I think the fact that, particularly with the funding recommendations, that hasn't always been the case, that the two-year sector and the coordinating board are all on the same page, but having that unified front of we really do need to make these investments in these formulas that the legislature and that the two-year sector kind of stuck their necks out on and said, we're willing to go to this model. And then the legislature didn't really kind of keep up with that commitment. Having all of us on the same page to emphasize the importance of that is having an impact.
John, with regard to the legislation you were talking about from Chair Turner and Senator West, is that still at the Ledge Council, or?
You're talking about the Texas Works? Oh, no, the transfer legislation.
Yes.
My understanding is that they have drafts. They're just getting ready to file. I expect that's going to be, well, it has to be.
Tomorrow is the deadline, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's what I thought.
So, and again, what I understand from both offices is these are going to be basically kind of working drafts. It's going to be legislation that's going to implement some of our recommendations, against some others' recommendations, and then we're going to have a conversation during the session to say, what are the elements of this that we need to put together that are going to give us the best result.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and
thank you.
Now I think we can almost go back to our agenda, which will be number 2, kind of the summary notes of our last meeting. Does anyone have any corrections or amendments, or would you
Move approval.
in a motion and a second? All those in favor say aye. Aye. So adopted. The next on the item was this discussion of council's charge. Like I said, I ran across the Texas Administrative Code, and there are 4 tasks that are set out there. And I did a minimum amount of research, and it seems that they were adopted in 2014, and then in 2017 they were amended. And that was as a result, and maybe some of you were part of that, but that was a result of the council saying they had some problems with the 4. But I just thought that we ought to remind ourselves that these are charges we have. I think, and I think all of you, it was sent to you, I think, yes. And, it certainly looks like on 4, review the agenda of the 2 associations. And I guess, I don't know that we're providing recommendations to the board, but we're certainly communicating with staff about, I think, everyone's consensus, the good job that all 3 organizations have been doing, the board and the 2 associations, into pushing forward a legislative agenda to the benefit of community and technical colleges. But I guess I want to get people's input on the other 3, building collaborative relationships that allowed state to leverage and scale the positive results of improvement initiatives and partnership at community college, technical, and state colleges. I mean, I guess generally when we receive information, it kind of goes along those lines, but does anyone have any ideas on how we could further work to that area, or does the staff have any ideas? Or are we meeting that charge? Do we want to work hard to meet that charge? I've recently got this. I really haven't visited with anyone about it, but I just feel that we need to be aware that these charges are out there. We may not make any decisions today, but, we may want to, I don't know if a couple of people want to get together and talk about them and then bring back some ideas. But to me, this is a flat earth committee, so I'm looking for input from anyone, including staff, about these charges.
So I have some thoughts on this. Because TSTC is really active in trying to build collaborations and partnerships with the rest of the sector. If you look at what happened up in the Rust Belt during the Great Recession, you can see that financial exigency caused all kinds of innovative ways that higher ed was able to do their job with less resources. It was at the end of a fiscal shotgun that they had to do that. The Texas economy has never had to face that because we've been so strong for so long, we've never seen that shotgun. But it may happen one day, and the time to prepare for tough times is when the sun's shining. It's now. And higher ed, by its nature, operates like a cottage industry. Each one of us knitting sweaters one at a time, all over the state, wholly redundant to each other, and doing it at an aggregate scale that is industrial in nature. Shame on us if we don't begin to look at the possibilities of working together. Perfect example is up in the northeast part of the state, the community colleges joined together, primarily rural, to do to work together in the back end of the house. In their overhead situations, they did purchasing consortia and things like that. The reason being, every time they saved $1 in the back room, that dollar went into the classroom. And so this committee has a rare opportunity to begin to talk about what are some of the possibilities of applying scale to our schools that we have, the benefit we have of being an industrial scaled entity. And in order to do that, we're going to have to overcome some of our long legacy of resisting when people reach over that service delivery line and say, hey, how about we work together on something? So there's my editorial on that topic.
I like that comment, and let me give you an example of something I wondered about a few years ago with the advent of the BATs, and I talked to a number of schools. This isn't the case with all of them, but with a number, it seemed to be an issue of taking students with some strong technical skills and adding some management or leadership on top of it. And speaking of rules, because I wonder, well, why do we need that at every school? Why couldn't we do that across schools electronically, somehow save money? Because that is a real issue. But when you develop that individually, just the cost of getting a different kind of SACS accreditation can be immense. So that would be an example. Another personal example is when one of my daughters went to a liberal arts school in Minnesota, the president said at Parents' Day, and I don't know how it's played out, but there was another small school there, St. Olaf's, is Carleton College, and St. Olaf said, we don't really need to have separate IT systems. We don't really need to have separate financial systems. We're talking together about these things are more business services in some ways, how we can have the differences we need but reduce our costs by doing it together. Now, I don't know if they followed through. And a different kind of example, I don't know if they're still doing it, but a number of years ago, Rice and the University of Houston realized they had a large number of language programs that they didn't have enough students to really justify continuing. So they worked together so that between the two schools, they could continue to offer those programs, and Rice students could go to UH for some and UH to Rice for some of those. So there are things like that that I'm sure a lot of you have thought about. And it even fits into a different idea of statewide contracting for some things. When we did TechShare, there's concern about journals going away. Well, I know Angelo State had journals they couldn't have had before, and the first wave was universities and community colleges, but UT Austin at that point saved 30% on what they were already doing. Other schools couldn't afford. So I think, and all of you would be better positioned in many ways to see those type of opportunities, but I think we would be glad to work with you on some of those things you think, or you might want to raise issues.
What is BAT?
It's a Baccalaureate of Applied Technology.
Okay.
Bachelor's of Applied. It's the community college
Yes, sir.
baccalaureate.
So I can build on that, David. You know that back starting in 2014, the 4 TSTC colleges launched an operational integration. And we concluded it in 2016, and we went from 5 HR departments to 1. We went 5 IT groups to 1, 5 HR groups to 1. And the amount of money we've saved on the back end has been astounding. Not only that, but we now have a statewide scale that defines our services there that is far higher than it was when we were each doing it very locally. Now, and a goal of that whole thing was to raise the caliber of services at the small institutions up to that of the big institutions, and it worked. So those are, I can witness to real-world benefits to this sort of consideration.
Ron, a comment. There's a currently funded project, and it's called TC3. It's led by Texarkana College, and Pam's shaking her head. I was going to put her on the spot. You want to just take over and run with this?
Yes, this started with Kilgore and Texarkana, Angelina, Paris Community College, the small to mid-sized colleges that were looking at getting a new ERP system, which was extremely expensive. And so we have formed this organization called TC3. There's now 7 colleges. Hill is a part of this. We're the last ones to come on board. Midland has just, their board just approved for them to come on board, and then Brazosport is looking at it. But it's to have a common thread of these schools have gone with Gensabar, or they call it J1, which is their ERP system. Some of you have banners, some of you have different types. And the beauty of this organization is that as a new school comes on board, it reduces our cost. And so we're looking at expanding this in other areas as well to share other things, some purchasing, and not to mention, I think the big thing that sold us, other than the cost savings, was the technology support. As each of these schools have implemented the J1 model, we have a system of support with the other schools that we can share, and you know, they're working out the pitfalls as this implementation is being done. So that's just one example of some cost sharing, and I think we're up to 7 colleges right now.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. I would like to learn more. Just a month ago, I wish Julie were here still. We were talking about, we've always had this issue that there's so many student information systems, and it's hard to do something statewide with that. But we actually had reached the point where they're a handful, and maybe we could help people who share the common things to work together to do what you're talking about. So I'm going to tell Julie about that. We need to learn. That sounds really important, what you're doing.
And here's an added benefit, as if you're able to coordinate the data systems, the AI solutions that we've been talking about automatically get talked to in a language where everybody's saying the same thing, and those systems will get wicked smart really fast if we were able to do that.
That's a great
Well, and just briefly, I mean, and David just sharing, it's right, it was actually a state appropriation. It's a small amount of money that goes to Texarkana College, $1.25 million a year, and we manage the contract, but the colleges do all the work and everything. But the last yearly report, and I don't really want to say numbers because I don't remember the numbers, but, and Pam, if you know the numbers, you can, of course, obviously, but considering the seed money versus the reported savings and what they're doing and what it would have cost each institution to implement Genzabar independently, have a great justification for the $1 million worth of seed money. I mean, it's a significant return.
I'm not sure what the savings for each college. For us, it's about $800,000, which is pretty significant for us. Pam England, president of Paris College, is the chair of the TC3, and I'm sure she can also, they've been in it a long time, and as well as Texarkana, and so I'm sure they'll be happy to share. We've just come on board this last year, so.
Well, let me ask some hard questions. Mike, would you like to, I don't know if it's ever been done, but chair a subcommittee for looking at cooperations, and Pam be the co-chair, cooperation between community colleges, and then anyone else who wants to be on that committee. And I could see it would be a telephonic one, and then we need some point people with the commission. I know you all have a lot of spare time.
You
but
just
anyway.
taught me to be quiet from now on.
At first, I mean, if you guys did that, I was already sitting here thinking, some type of statewide meeting where we brought in.
I'm happy to help. I'm going through reaccreditation right now.
Yeah, so are we. But I'd serve too. I won't serve, though, unless there's a co-chair from the community colleges.
Interested? I can. I would be willing to also, but at the same time, I like participation.
It could be we could ask TAC if they would. Well, there we go.
Yeah, Paul.
Yeah.
Paul and I can. If anyone else wants to, just let us
Okay.
know. And
Just a quick note of caution, make sure your subcommittee doesn't grow to equal the number of people that it would constitute a quorum. Because if you do, then your subcommittee meetings are open to Meetings Act and all kinds of stuff, and so just, and it'd have to be posted and so forth. But if you keep it below that, so the
Well, Rex, according to the Court of Appeals, as long as we're walking, it doesn't matter, right?
Actually, if you were walking, it does matter.
actually, I think it's the other way around.
There is a recent case.
8.
Yeah. So just-
So the part of the solution could be that we invite professionals and trustees who aren't members of this committee who may have an interest in doing this kind of work, and then you'll be okay.
Okay. Okay. Let me.
And TAC could help, and CAT could help us with that.
Yeah. I'll visit with Rose and Jacob. That's a very good idea. We can talk about them. Next, we will joyfully skip to item 6, which is the relating transfer and fields of study.
So I'll make this brief. In terms of fields of study, we have now have 30 board-approved fields of study out there. Roughly a third to a half of those were effective last fall. The others, some of them, are another third or so, or to a half, will be effective coming this fall. 22 of those 30 are in the top 25 transfer majors, and the 3 that are remaining are all in process. We sent one out for public comment yesterday or today with computer science. We have multidisciplinary studies, which is really about the interdisciplinary study degrees, and for community colleges, the Associate of Arts and Teaching degrees that lead to teacher certification. Those have been out for public comment, and so we're still working on that one. And then the third one is kinesiology and wellness, and part of that is out for comment as well. And so those have been the ones that have, the AET, I held off on that one on purpose because the State Board of Educators certification was going through the process of implementing a new certification level of EC through 3 as a result of the last legislative session. And I wanted to make sure that our Associate of Arts degrees lined up with those new certification levels, whatever they were going to look like. So SBEC finally did its thing with that, and as soon as they did, and we created the committees for multidisciplinary studies, but really these interdisciplinary studies degrees. Kinesiology and wellness has proven to be very difficult, if you will. And that committee raised an interesting issue that has come up in other quarters, and that is that there's a concern on the part of four-year institutions that the ACGM and the courses in it have not kept up with the field. And so there's some, and I think in some cases that's true, in some cases it's not. I think kinesiology and wellness is one where there's a clear split between physical education in terms of people who want to teach physical education, particularly as the K through 12 sector and be coaches and what have you, and kinesiology on the other end, which has really become a very scientific-based study. And so, and ACGM, by and large, reflects physical education, not necessarily kinesiology. But as I pointed out to a group the other day when the commissioner and I met with the faculty councils of UT Austin and A&M College Station, and I said, but it's actually the field of study committees that have brought this to light, though. It's having those two groups of faculty talking to each other about what is needed to really bring this to light. And if without those, the two-year institutions would just keep on doing what they do because they don't know anything else to do. And the four-year institutions would have kept on doing what they did, and we still would have had clashes going on for students at the individual level. So I think a lot of that is beginning to work itself out. One comment I'll make about transfer in general terms in the legislature is that it was a significant issue in the Senate last session, and it is now a significant issue in both the Senate and the House. And I think that's a sign of the progress that's been made, and I really think that discussions around core curriculum and trying to make it more not only transferable but also more friendly in terms of application to degrees, But the conversations around field of study have prompted a lot of both going forward and regressing, if you will. And so I think that one of the things to be very cognizant of in legislation that comes out in terms of transfer is, and John put it in terms of, I forget exactly how you said it, but something about, sort of getting everybody on board. And I think we have to be very careful about whether the consensus turns out to be one in favor of institutions as opposed to one that's in favor of students. And the interests don't always align necessarily on an individual institutional basis as opposed to looking after the statewide welfare and interests of students themselves. But so it'll be an interesting session, I think, and I think that the House and the Senate, that their desire to get something on the table and then have some conversations about it is a really healthy and good move. And I think that a lot of us will have a chance to weigh in on this. And I would urge everybody to follow that legislation and really look at it and look at it closely to determine whether to, who's going to, so to speak, come out ahead on this, whether students will come out ahead or someone else will come out ahead on this. And so it'll be an interesting conversation.
To emphasize Rex's point about to whose benefit, just yesterday we both heard at least one senator say twice the cost to students of essentially having to repeat courses. And I think that sends a signal. And I found with just sort of in some conversations here or there that needs to be talked about more. That when I've talked to a few individuals and say, well, people change majors, they do this, they do that, and what does it matter if they have to take an extra? This goes to the broader issue about taking too many courses, not just transfer. And I said, well, it may mean $12,000 more in debt. And I think there are enough people out there that if they're reminded of this, they might really approach some of that counseling a little differently. It won't solve all of it, but with whatever legislative solution is, I think trying to get this focus, you do want people to have a strong degree. You do want them to get what's necessary in the field. You don't want them to have to pay more for that because we're not aligned as we should be. And I think Rex's point to faculty the other day about the field of study committees have helped to bring about some of these things. It is a vehicle where the people realize they're not for faculty across sectors to talk, because they do share the disciplines, whether they want to acknowledge that on the day they walk in. Many of them, or at least more, will recognize it when they walk out after those meetings. And I think that's really important.
Just kind of a comment and a question, I guess. One is, I hope the students win. As we go into this, gosh, if we're not about the student, then why are we even in this business, at any level? But leads to the question on the fields of study. If we go in and we're doing this work and we're generating these core curriculums for all these different fields of study, is there going to be, how do I put this politely, a significant push at the legislative level or at some other level on all the schools participating in the state, 4-year and 2-year schools, to accept these as full transferable hours without question or rebuke? Because if we don't have that, then our students are still losing.
Well, an interesting question there, and I know Rex will want to say something too, is the law on the books says that should happen. How do you make sure it happens is the point. And so, as some of you have heard me say probably too many times, when you know it's not happening, you need to let us know where so we can do some follow-up, because we don't hear that much. We just hear. So, but I know at least one proposal came up from one sector recently, and Rex heard me ask, I said, okay, well, what's the enforcement mechanism here? I didn't, the response was that's up to the legislature. But it doesn't do anything worthwhile to have it on the books if it doesn't really happen. And I know that whatever you do, there'll be some exceptions that arise because of unique circumstances, but we need to have something that the students can count on. I've said off and on over the years, while we don't have a system of higher education in the state, at least my view is we have to act more as though we have a system. And that's for the students' benefit. So this is the word, we have to talk a lot around here about being relentless, and I think this is one area where we have to be relentless.
Well, one of the things we have done, part of our legislative proposals, is to include sort of transfer monitoring, if you will, as a part of our compliance monitoring piece. So one of the things that changed for the coordinating board as a result of sunset legislation in 2015 was it explicitly set up certain areas where the coordinating board can check for compliance. And it's called the compliance monitoring function. And so we have beefed up our internal audit folks to do this, and we've asked that the field of study and transfer stuff be included as a part of that compliance monitoring feature. We've also I've had a lot of conversations with Julie and others in her area about how do we use the kind of student level data that we have to track some of this. We have ongoing conversations with TACRO about how to transcript this so that it'll make it much easier for people to track and follow these things. But we know that with student level data, we can find out what a student's major was. We can do some backtracking and look at what did they graduate in. Did they have these courses when they transferred, and were those courses applied? We can use some proxies to get a fix on, to some extent, on sort of who's following and who's not. And what we have discovered so far, which is something that I think I knew all along, but it's one of those intuitive things, and now there's sort of evidence coming forward that says what I thought was happening is actually happening. And that is that I don't know that there's a single institution out there that says, we're not going to do this. What happens is there are individual departments who say, we're not going to do this, while another department may say, yeah, this is fine. We'll figure out a way to make this work. And they may be in the same institution. And so it's that kind of sort of relentless pursuit, if you will, of trying to track that down. But we do need your help. And I tell people this all the time. I can't try to fix what I don't know about. And we can send out all the memos across the state and remind people of what their obligations are, but it's when someone is not following those and we know who they are that we can go to them and say, it's been brought to my attention that you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And we don't have to throw anybody under the bus in the process. Most of the time you bring it to their attention, have some conversation about what it is they're supposed to be doing, and then people will do it. But we need to know who they are, and that's a good point.
One thing short of perfection in the data system, I don't know if I've told you this, Rex, but I've mentioned it to Julie and some others, is one first marker, it's like not having a real oil gauge in your car, you just know when it's hot, is we can look at students, we can define, so let's say students who, like we do with the baccalaureate, 30 hours, complete 30 hours. We can look at 30 hours, what the person said they were majoring in when they transferred. How many hours did they attempt when they graduated from that university? And so that's sort of a first sort of light on the dashboard we could begin to look at to say, okay, maybe we see that there are 5 or 6 schools where that excess number is less. Now, students have excess numbers when they never leave the community college. People have excess numbers when they stay at the same university, so we'd have to gauge that. But we might be able to at least identify some schools where something seems to be working, and we could even maybe break it down by some majors and go in and see, is there something unique there that we could look at, short of where we'd like to get, where we've, our folks who go out in the field could actually look at this and see, is it happening or not? Are people having to repeat classes? But there are some things that I think would be worth looking at. It may be more of an internal process to just sort of tease things out, so if we develop more ability, we'd know better what to look for. But as you know, it's hard. Well, actually, probably all don't know, but if you're talking about thousands of transcripts and figuring that out. We did do a transcript study in 2004 where thousands of transcripts where a few schools participated, and we did learn some things. I thought we were going to be able to do that again. I don't know if we can afford to, where we learned that some of the problems people thought were there were not there. We learned there were more grades below C than we realized. We can address that now with our own internal system. We learned that organic chemistry was a problem and that it was considered lower division at some schools and upper division at some schools. So we weren't surprised to learn nursing was somewhat of a problem everywhere, whether you went from community colleges to universities or community college or university. We think that may be largely fixed, but at some level, I think we need to find a way to refine the problem to see are there some areas that really are the most troublesome. And we know that there are going to be some problems everywhere, but if it's like 25 students have this problem statewide, we'd like to fix that. But if we've got something where we've got hundreds, we need to really do something about that right away. And the 25, we can probably do that with the phone call. Is that off base, Rex?
I think it's absolutely correct. And part of it is to refine the process of how we look at this. And, I sort of talked about it in terms of finding the miscreants, but we also need to find the ones who are doing it well and do some exploration into and how are they doing this and making it well so that we can pass it on as well. Because sometimes, sometimes people just struggle with how to implement these kinds of things. And while, for me, it seems real easy because I've been deeply involved in it for a long time. But for someone that's just brand new to, it's a different issue. And that's true at both the two-year level and for two-year institutions, but also for four institutions as well. So,
I just had a question. Has there been any progression on looking at, and Rex, this is probably for you or David, on the portal, the North Texas Community College Consortium Transfer Collaborative Portal, and what we've been doing up there?
yes, we've had a lot of conversations with Christine Hubbard and talked about how to move that statewide and some issues like that. So we've had a lot of conversation with them about how they can help us and how we can help them. So, yeah.
You look at the board's, what were presented as transfer recommendations. One of it was really the online presence. That would be one possibility, but I mentioned the professor at UT who did the study, and that sort of put some exclamation points by what we thought was the case already. But it can be cheaper to start from something that's already figured out a lot of problems. To do something from scratch, we know could be very expensive. But we need something, and it faces the reality of how students learn things today. And we know you guys, at whatever sector, are never going to have as many advisors as you'd like or need. So you need to supplement it with things, some online presence and the chat bot and some other things as we go along.
I'd like to also just add in that once we get to the point that we begin to get some good data, we all know that the community colleges, for years, it doesn't transfer. And people in the community say that. It's been said forever. And when we're talking about 60 by 30, there's also got to be that mutual respect between institutions. And we have to, and I'm hopeful, Rex, that in your meetings that what we've hopefully accomplished is that we have faculties that are appreciating, people are addressing that. And so we are doing the same things, because as we affect that and we get that mutual respect, and then our public, going to your point, they just see us as higher ed. And so if we can't get internally working together, then it sends messages that, that credit's not as, it's not worth it, or it's not going to transfer. And then when you're trying to reach out to all the different schools in the state, and we're trying to make 60 by 30, we will create our own failure if we don't find ways to make that all come together. So as you guys are finding some of these myths that's not the truth, at some point, we need to get that information out.
And it brings us back to the collaborative discussion really as well, because this is collaborative, and at some level it occurs to me there's so much discussion across the country in terms of return on investment from education and cost and whatever. And so some universities, if they want to continue their vitality, need to realize that this is transfer is part of that conversation, and how people view how people get to that, and whether they will continue to do the things they think are most important. And I always have to say, 35% of our baccalaureate graduates had at least 30 semester credit hours from a community college. To me, I know there's a number, higher percentage taking, but to me that says, a third of our baccalaureate graduates had a significant contribution from community college, not just a course or two, but essentially a quarter of their degree. That's really important, and we need to remember that, and that's collaborative as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important point. And so, because one of the things that we've looked at is over time, and everybody talked about time to degree for a long time. And then we began to really look at this issue of how many semester credit hours do you have to degree. But if you look at transfer data, then our studies, and one caveat about this is that everything we think we know about transfer students comes from looking at people who actually graduated with a 4-year degree. What we don't really know a lot about is that huge number of folks who don't graduate with a 4-year degree, who transferred or didn't transfer. So students who start at a 4-year institution and graduate from that same 4-year institution, their excess number of hours is actually a small negative number because they bring in AP, that kind of thing. For 2-year to 4-year, it's about 138 hours now or so. the excess hours are about 15 or 16 hours or so over. Dual credit adds another 6 hours to that if they had dual credit. And if you look at the excess hours, and I think part of what the transfer study shows, because it's required to look at what happens to a person after they transfer, not necessarily before they transfer. And once a student transfers, they tend to finish in about, right, you're absolutely right, they tend to finish in about the same time with about the same number of hours as the native students do, but they tend to accumulate their excess hours before they transfer, not after they transfer. And part of that, I think, is historically been, quite frankly, I think historically it's been that as two-year institutions, we've had the tendency to tell people, it'll all transfer. The four-year institutions have also had a tendency to tell people, oh, yeah, it'll all transfer. And part of the shift, I think, in thinking about this in recent years has been to shift from, is it going to transfer, to is it actually going to apply to anything? And I think part of what we see with excess hours is that showing up of well, it doesn't just transfer, but is actually going to apply to a degree. And I think the other thing that it shows, and I think if you look at those numbers carefully, and we can talk about this more at the next meeting if you would like, is that time to degree in those hours for those transfer students is coming down. And I think what that demonstrates is the commitment that the community colleges have made, usually under the guise of guided pathways, but whatever you want to call it, the community colleges are doing a better job than they did before of trying to guide students as much as they can. Now, this is, and we have to recognize too, this is compounded by the fact that you have multiple degrees at multiple institutions. And as one vice chancellor of one of our major systems put it to me one day, I've got X number of colleges in this system, and I guarantee you that no two of them are doing anything alike. And so advisors, no matter how good they are, and trust me, I see their program, it's true. Mechanical engineering at institution A in the same system and mechanical engineering at institution B in the same system will have differences. And it will, so part of what we know is that while transfer from a 2 to a 4-year institution is a complicated affair, transfer from a 4-year to a 4-year institution is even more complicated. But oddly enough, it's even more complicated to try to transfer from a 2-year to a 2-year, particularly in workforce programs, and something that we're tackling through a different issue of programs of study. But at any rate, it's an interesting phenomenon, and I think you're absolutely right that we need to pay much more attention to not the time involved, because particularly for community college students and those who start, there are other factors involved in this. They may have to drop out to work for a semester. I once knew a guy years and years ago who he went to college semester by semester, and he would sometimes take a semester or two in between his semester to go to work full-time in construction and make enough money that he could pay cash and be a full-time student for that semester. So it took him probably 6 years or more to get out of college, but at the end of it, he got out with zero debt, and he got out probably within a course of whatever his degree requirements were. So I think you're absolutely right that that's something to really focus a lot of attention on and to make sure that we understand those other variables that are there. I think it's absolutely true.
Well, that might be a topic, and real quickly, another one may be when we were kicking around dual credit, rigor came up. And I think we've satisfied, or at least the studies show, that the rigor is equal. I mean, there's no rigor problem. We all have to be alert to make sure that doesn't falter. But I also got the impression sometimes when they talk about the potential lack of rigor in dual credit, it's also subtly a potential lack of rigor in community colleges, because we're the ones who are teaching it. So years ago, we used to get all these great reports from you guys on how the community college student was doing at a 4-year college when they were transferred. They would the data that I saw, the community college transfer student generally did better than the native student.
Yeah, as a VP, I used to see those from
Yeah,
time to time.
I've got to say,
Yeah.
those numbers typically didn't compare the same things. When the ones I've seen, when you compare juniors with the same number of hours to transfers, it's about the same. It's a lot of the things that came out early compared to the native students, and so you had the loss that's typically built in after the freshman year. And so you've got some of those numbers where the important thing is they're equivalent.
Well, that's right.
That's
And
important.
I'm not
that
here to
it's
say.
better, but that it's equivalent. But
I'm not here to say it is better or it should be better, but if it's equal, that message needs to get out there because there is a lingering, well, you know.
Absolutely.
So I think maybe
I agree with that.
that might be another agenda item. Speaking of agenda items, sometimes we have problems with the quorum. June 13th is our next one. I know I can't make it, but which is no big deal. But what do people think about a meeting in June? What is everybody happy with the 13th, or because that's kind of vacation?
That's okay.
Well, one thing is it does coincide with the TAC
The
and
TAC,
CCAT
right.
meeting on the 14th and 15th. I was just glad that the meeting's here and that meeting's here, so we wouldn't have to come down here and then go to Fort Worth or down
Right.
someplace else. I mean, that date's good with me.
Everything okay?
I'm okay with it.
Okay. Just wanted to,
Same bat station.
yes, 10:30, I guess is still, I thought it was 10:40. Sorry for the joke. Anyway, anything else to come before the council?
Yes, I would like to make one, if I could. One announcement, and that is to tell you that today will be Gary Thomerson's last meeting with this group, because next Friday will be his last day at the coordinating board. And he's going to move on to other ventures. And as you know, he has shepherded this council from the beginning and has done a good job of shepherding, I believe. And he's also done a lot of good work for community colleges and for career and technical education, in particular the programs of study work that we've done. He's headed up a lot of the field of study work that has taken place and been instrumental in getting some work done with continuing education and other endeavors. So I have greatly appreciated his presence on this council, but also at the coordinating board. So I just want y'all to know that this will be it. So.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you. If you have any emails for me, just send them to Rex.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. We are adjourned.